Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and the former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press. Dan, thanks again for coming in. The idea now that there's possibly a deal that each side is now putting out these feelers, that the Qatari foreign minister put something out from Washington. It seems as though they're just trying to see what trial balloons they're putting up in the air.
It kind of looks that way. You can speak of the fog of war. This is more like the fog of peace. I've yet to see any indication that Hamas has dropped its demand for a complete end to the war. And without that, I do not see how this government, really almost any government, can possibly agree to a deal. So it looks like a lot of wishful thinking by people wanting to prod the sides towards some elegant solution, but it remains a square peg in a round hole, as far as I can tell.
But it seems as though what they're also doing is that they're getting a lot of, the Israelis are getting a lot of pressures from the British and from the Americans by having this idea of a unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state.
Well, this attaches to the notion that maybe part of what can prod the sides to abandoning one or more of their bedrock demands, in Israel's case, a removal of Hamas, would be a mega deal in which the benefits to Israel would be so overwhelming that they would agree to something elegant in Gaza that fundamentally returns the hostages but does not truly crush Hamas. That will be difficult for Netanyahu to pass in his coalition for sure. Indeed, any hostage deal, even one that involves a prolonged truce but not an end to the war, is already the focus of a lot of opposition within his own coalition, and it sort of looks like he would lose the hard right if he agrees to even a basic element of this reported deal, which would be at least a 6-week pause in the early phase.
Dan, it seems as though the U.S. administration at first, after October 7th, was very much pro-Israel, and is now, 119 days later, we're pulling back just a little bit.
Well, October 7th was a shocking event, and Biden speaks of himself as a Zionist, and there was an emotional reaction to stand by Israel. But I said even then, Israel has a lot of rope, but it's not without limit. Everyone reasonable, supports the goals of returning the hostages and crushing Hamas, which is almost literally the embodiment of evil in the global landscape, but not at all cost. I think Israel's rope is ending, and the war for Biden is a tremendous inconvenience in an election year where he needs both the Jews and the far left, the progressives and the minorities, and the war has divided these two constituencies. So he needs the war to end. But more than this, October 7th changed a lot, but it didn't change everything. We still breathe oxygen. America's fundamental strategic imperative is for a partition of the Holy Land and a creation of a Palestinian state. And many in Israel would argue that that is indeed in Israel's interest as well, because absent a partition, Israel plus the West Bank plus Gaza is more than half not Jewish. That cannot possibly prosper. So the question is how to create a security landscape that makes Israel be able to essentially, in phases, give up the West Bank without fearing that it will turn into another Gaza, and the next attack will be on Kfar Saba and the outskirts of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
In case you didn't hear that properly, there were a lot of people there who were denying that October 7th actually happened. They said, in addition to that, and this is Palo Alto, California, that Israel attacked its own citizens, that this October 7th never happened. The 1,400 people, the 1,200 people who were killed, and the 200 who were held hostage was some sort of false flag incident. Dan Perry, I mean, this is, 119 days into it. We're in a political season right now. These are people running for Congress, and they're being heckled.
They're being heckled by October 7th deniers. And look, we can be shocked every time idiocy confronts us. But the fact is, X% of the people in any country are always going to be ready to believe nonsense. And that is what's happening with October 7th denial. It has to be fought. It's part of a PR campaign. And that also slots into the fact that Israel has become a political issue in the U.S. And it's not just because of anti-Semitism. It's not just because of progressive lunacies. It also relates to Israel's own actions in certain ways. whether or not people here like to admit that or not.
So that goes into the story about that President Biden announced sanctions against four settlers in the West Bank who were somehow involved in a violent incidents that occurred in the West Bank. Happens to happen hours before he goes to Michigan, when Michigan has a large Arab
One
community.
might suspect it was political.
One might suspect. I want to ask your thoughts about that.
I think the distaste for the violence of extreme settlers is genuine. But timing is everything in politics. And of course, Biden, who won Michigan by a whisper 3.5 years ago, cannot afford to have the Muslims in Michigan, the Democratic Muslim constituencies in Michigan, which is the largest Muslim constituency in the swing state, abandon him. So, sure.
Let's talk about UNRWA for a second, because there's a story today that there is a Norwegian politician who has submitted papers. This is a socialist Norwegian politician who submitted papers for UNRWA to get a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, granted, anybody can do this. Donald Trump was submitted for a Nobel Peace Prize. There are other people who have done
You could submit Hamas for a Nobel Peace Prize. Nothing prevents it.
Well, what does it say about that? What the European philosophy is towards all of this?
It says that one guy's a nut job, but beyond that, it shows that this kind of inanity has some political support. That's why he was able to do it without fearing ridicule. There has been a monumental PR failure by Israel to present the truth about Hamas. There is a sense in the world that Hamas represents a Palestinian national cause. I would argue Hamas is the biggest enemies the Palestinians have, more than Israel. Hamas's entire raison d'etre is to prevent a two-state solution, which the Palestinians need no less than Israel, and no less than the U.S. might prefer it. As for UNRWA, UNRWA's sin is one of omission. They failed to stand up to Hamas. They failed to correct the textbooks in the schools that they run. Now, they don't do the textbooks, but they can demand corrections. They don't have to teach Mein Kampf in their schools. They failed to do that. Those textbooks, by the way, are PA textbooks, not Hamas textbooks. But the fact that Hamas in Gaza is happy with them shows you something about the PA curriculum. They also clearly were at least passively complicit with Hamas in Gaza. Now, and in some ways actively. It's difficult to stand up to a violent terrorist mafia. I get that. It's not shocking that they acquiesced in certain ways. But there's a limit, and UNRWA probably went past the limit.
But there's a PR, you mentioned about a PR issue, and let me show our viewers, just moments ago, the Shin Bet released photos of, if you remember, there was an incident earlier in the week where there were 3 Hamas fighters who were killed in a hospital in Jenin. And it was done by Yamam Secret Service agents who went into the hospital and they shot and killed the 3. These are pictures that were just released now by the Shin Bet of those agents getting ready for that operation. Dan Perry, there's a reason why Shin Bet had to release these pictures.
Well, it's a little bit unseemly when an extrajudicial killing passes for good PR, but it kind of does, because the world loves Fauda, and this was a classic Fauda operation. And unlike the messy and hitherto not that successful seeming operation in Gaza, this was extremely surgical, pun intended, and the goal was achieved, and there was no collateral damage, no harm to civilians, and it reflected something that Israel needs to have the world understand.
Which is?
Hospitals are abused by radical Palestinian rejectionists. It shows that what happens in Palestinian hospitals sort of lifts the veil of inviolability from these hospitals. It is not a war crime to attack a hospital if a terrorist militia is holding meetings in it. The PR problem that Israel has is multifaceted. For one thing, Israel's lost the far left around the world. With its mostly fallacious narratives of oppressed and oppressor, and if the more white you are, the more evil you are, decolonization nonsense.
How do you fix this? How do you, I mean, like...
And it's going to get worse, Albert, because whereas this is only 1 in 6 Americans, it's 1 in 2 youth. So unless the youth grow up when they grow up, which might happen, but it also might not, this will soon become 1/3 of the country and then a majority. You fix it with well,
I mean,
with better PR.
As much as you could show Hamas what they did on October the 7th, the issues that they deal with the Palestinian
I said
people.
Before, and this sometimes is less popular to speak of openly in Israel, but one must. It attaches also to Israel's own actions. If Israel went into Gaza with guns blazing and collateral damage all over the place, but said, "We're doing you a favor. We have to get rid of Hamas," the day after will be a very good day after. We're going to help you create a Palestinian state, demilitarized but free, and we're going to organize global aid, and it'll be part of regional peace. Any kind of vision that shows a movement towards something the world can line up behind, it would be better publicity for Israel. If it refuses to discuss the day after because the far right in Netanyahu's cabinet won't let him, and we're talking about a prime minister who just tried to basically Putinize the country and is seen as part and parcel of the global authoritarian movement that's not popular among democratic countries. Yeah, there was a reprieve on October 7th because of the global historic barbarism of that day, but that reprieve is not forever. I think if Israel had a peace government and not this government, it would have better PR. Israel takes a PR hit more for what it's doing in the West Bank than Gaza. The Gaza situation, one can defend. The regime in the West Bank is difficult to defend. You will not find many friends in America for that, not even Biden. Biden will support the war in Gaza. He will not support the settlements in the West Bank.
Dan Perry, always good to have you in our studio for analysis. Thanks again.